Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Catholic Mysticism and Spirituality, where we talk about all things of our beautiful Catholic faith and the saints and topics that might be very interesting to our listeners. And today I have a special guest. Robert Hanley is with us, and he has written a gem of a book, Do You See What I See? Discovering the Obvious. Good afternoon, Robert. How are you?
Well, good morning, Al. How are you? I'm very excited about being on your show, so much so I know it's a radio show, but I shaved in order to do a good job for your audience.
Well, I'm sure we all appreciate that, and because it is a radio show, ladies and gentlemen, I have not shaved, so
good
one out of two. All right, as I was telling the audience that this is a gem of a book. It's called Do You See What I See? Finding the Obvious, Finding a Better and More Meaningful Life. There are sort can apply to your life, and it's just awesome. And look, Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, Al. Born in the Bronx, I'm an Irish-Italian Catholic, and born and raised there, and, went to grammar school there, St. Francis of Rome, and high school, Catholic high school. I had to go into the Army at one point. But before I got into the Army, I was doing some shows. Show business was calling, and I was doing some musicals in New York, off Broadway, and in Westchester County in New York. And when I went in the Army, I managed to become an entertainment specialist and did musicals and straight plays, and I wrote a review and directed it. By the time I got out, I was nominated for a scholarship to a university in San Diego, and came out. And also, while I was in college in San Diego, I got my equity card as a professional actor. And then upon graduation, I came up to L.A. It was either L.A. or New York, and I wanted to do television specifically at that point. Well, I also did theater as well, but mostly television. And then as time went by, I just lived in Hollywood, and actually I wasn't going to church for at that time. I was disenchanted somewhat, and I think because of my youth, even though I was in my 20s, and life itself, stuff happens, and you get away from, I did anyway, I got away from practicing my faith. And by the time I was, I guess, in my early 30s, around 30 years old, someone suggested, they met me and said, Robert, do you go to church? And I said, no, I was raised a Catholic, and I feel like I'm a good person. I don't know that I need, I need that. And the person who said that to me, I respected, and I said, you know what, I'll go back to church. And I went to Our Lady of Grace in Encino, California, and the first or second time I went to Mass there, a priest, I could hear him after the gospel. He was giving his homily, and I thought to myself what Jesus went through at that time. That agent in Hollywood just did that to me. I forget what the sermon was or what the gospel reading was. And that led me to continue going, and that was in 1983, and I've never stopped going to Our Lady of Grace. And since then, I've become very involved with not only that parish, our parish in Encino, California. When I say our parish, my wife Corinne and I, and not only with that parish, but many parishes in L.A. I was at Our Lady of Grace. I was a lector coordinator, belonged to the men's group, hosted all of the fairs and fundraisings at the church was just taught CCD for a few months. That's another story. It's kind of nice. But anyhow, I was very involved and continue this day. Since at one point I started a group called the Entertainment Fellowship that addressed the ethics and morals in the entertainment industry. And with that group, I was at 5 or 6 parishes regularly for a number of years. Our mission was to enable people to recognize, people in the entertainment industry to recognize Judeo-Christian principles and apply those principles to their careers. And that grew to 4,000 people, and it was mostly, like myself, actors, comedians, writers, actually truck drivers, makeup people, things of that sort, casting directors. And it was quite successful, and after a number of years, I noticed people were coming to me and starting groups of their own. And at one point I said to my wife, I said, I think it's time for me to move on. I missed performing live, and things were going well. I figured, I said something when I started the Entertainment Fellowship. Somebody came up to me and said, gosh, you're Robert Hanley. You started this whole thing. And it was kind of humbling to hear somebody say that to me, because I always believe that, and I say to this day, God tapped me on the shoulder. And when that person said that to me, I came back home and I had just gotten a computer, and I put at the top of it, Jesus Christ heads this fellowship, let his love guide us. And I also put somebody else said to me shortly thereafter, they said, Robert, when we were, 1,000 people or so, they came up to me and said, did you ever think that the Entertainment Fellowship would, the way it started with just a small group of people, would grow to have 1,000 people in it? And I said, yeah, actually, I did think that it would grow. And I quoted a line from Chariots of Fire, which says, run in God's name and let the world stand back in wonder. And that's been a reference for me ever since then. When you ask me, tell you something about myself, in short, Catholic school, went away from the church, came back to the church, and am deeply involved with my faith, not only by going to church and parishes, but in my everyday life. In the book, there's a couple of things that people, when they talk to me after they read the book, one of the things is I ask the reader, who are you? Because what happens is people go through life and they never ask themselves who they are. And I feel that we usually answer that question by saying, what we do for a living. And, I'm thinking of what I wrote in the book. We grow in years, but most of us don't seem to grow in self-knowledge. Are we wiser, better, or just older, seeking yet another way, one more way to lose weight? Maturity, mistakenly, is often associated with age and not with personal growth. We celebrate birthdays, but what would it be like to celebrate the real meaningful milestones of our lives? What would it be like? I'm reading from my book now. What would it be like to celebrate the moment we learn to sincerely forgive a friend or family members in our hearts, or to uncover the real reason we can't? What would it be like to celebrate not doing the same old thing the same old way and change? And I could go on, but the two things that people ask me is, okay, Robert, who are you? And another thing they ask me is, what is your best quality? Because as I mentioned in the book, when I meet people, instead of saying, in the 70s especially, people would say, what's your sign? If you were meeting a girl or a guy in social matters. But most people, they don't ask questions that are telling. And I would ask people, one of the questions was, Actually, I got to a point where I would ask somebody, so do you believe in God? And I can remember at one point somebody saying, what kind of question is that to ask somebody? Well, it told me a lot about that person, particularly if I was dating or interested in a female at the time. And another question I ask is, what do you think is your best quality? And usually that catches people off guard. They say to me all the time when I ask this, wow, that's a good question. Or they stop and think and say my best quality. And there's a story about that in the book as well. So let me answer both of those questions for you. And I think in telling you something about me that I feel is important, as far as what is my best quality and who I think I am, I think my best quality is my desire to get closer to God. And that's where the point I've been at for a long time. And that's changed over the years. I had different definitions of what my best quality is, but I've had that for quite a while. So my desire to get closer to God, and that's in all things. My wife and I pray every night, God, give us the grace to do your will, not ours. And as far as who I am, years ago, I heard someone say something about write down the 10 things that you think you are. And at the time I wrote funny, I put down talented to my own ego, and I put sensitive, I put inquisitive, things like that, words like that. And one of the things I put down, which I'll mention at the end, was something else that dawned on me and was so obvious to me. And after we did, I wrote these things down. I was listening to somebody, and they said, okay, now eliminate 5 of those things you think you are. And I eliminated 5, and then the person said, eliminate 3. And I eliminated 3, and there were 2 left. And he said, now eliminate 1. And the one that I kept, and to this day, the word was Catholic. Huh. And I know this is a religious show, your show, a mystical, show. I'm not saying that because of the genre of this show that you have, Al. And let me explain. As I looked at my life, I think that being a Catholic covers all of those things and all of those things in our faith. In other words, whether I do something that's kind or whether I'm short with someone, there's something about my faith that tells me who I am. No matter what I do, if I, as an actor or as an entertainer, as a stand-up comedian, as a husband, whatever I do, God says we all have talents, and he's not talking about people in show business, organizationally or writing or those kinds of things. By going back to that one word, Catholic, it really applies to all of those things. The kindness and the not being kind, the selfishness and the service that we provide. So as a mission for me, as a guiding light, a North Star, whatever, if you're not religious or spiritual, that is the paramount thing in my life. And I have many friends who are not religious, who are very good people, and I don't knock them over the head with my faith. I just, proselytizing, as they don't either with what their beliefs are. But I feel when push comes to shove, who I am, in telling you a little bit about myself, I would say that's the best answer I'm at now. I'm Catholic, and I would say that to anybody, and it served me very well. So I hope my future answers are not as long as that one. But anyhow.
No, I appreciate that. That's beautiful. And one of the things before we get into the book, I want to tell our listeners is that this book, you do not have to, you can be an atheist or an agnostic and read this book and still glean many, many, many great insights. So this isn't so don't feel listening that this is just something along the lines, like Robert was just saying, a straight Catholic book or anything like that. This book can reach a volume, a wide range of people. And I have to ask you this, Robert, because we're in a business that is actually with movies or television, and one of the reasons I like it is great escapism, and it's not really reality. It produces an illusion, and you are an extremely competitive business. And when you mention that about defining yourself as Catholic, I find that interesting because I want to ask you, did you, as you are in this industry, like I said, a competitive industry, do you find that you search this to find out who you are? Because being a layman and not involved in entertainment in any way, you read about these stories about actors and actresses and that they're superficial, they don't know who they are, they're playing various roles, and yet you are on this search. Now, did your faith lead you, or did your entertainment path lead you to discover that you are Catholic? If you in this question.
Al, I'm so sorry. I did not get all of that. If you could just repeat the gist of your question. Hello?
Yep. Hello? Can you hear?
Hello?
Hello? Yep.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Saying that, to the listeners that you're in an extremely competitive industry, and many people, think that the Hollywood people, entertainers, they're very superficial. Yet you, when you talk about it, it sounds like you really searched yourself to find out who you are. And I was asking, did your faith lead you to that, or something that you wrestled with while you were trying to get involved in the entertainment industry? How did it exactly lead you to the search to discover who you are? Because part of the book is about that, discovering who we are.
Oh, definitely. I don't think I think I think in all of us we have a sense of who we are. Somebody says something and we don't agree with it, whether it's politics or morals or, on the job, somebody you're working with, they say something and it just doesn't ring well. So I think that certainly happened. I think from a spiritual situation, the Holy Spirit, which people may or may not allude to, that eventually I refer to it as the Holy Spirit. But also, there's a DNA in all of us, and that DNA sometimes is good, sometimes it's not good, but 100% of the time, except for two people on the face of the earth, as I believe, we're all born with sin. And, I have my own roads to travel, and by being in situations with people or just plain situations where something occurs and, the type of person I am and where I felt the person I want to become, and I feel I'm on the road to that, it just doesn't fit. And I think, to your point, I don't think I cognizantly went after, this isn't Catholic. Certainly not in my 20s and 30s, or maybe my 30s it started happening. But gradually, I mentioned hearing that priest talk, and it was like when you're in grammar school, you get it drummed into you about our faith. And then the real world hits. And by the time I heard that homily and that gospel reading, I had some experience in life, and the two of them came together. So that was a defining moment for me where I could see who I am and what they taught me, what the presentation nuns taught me in grammar school and Irish Christian Brothers in high school. I could see them coming together, and my mother and father, what they taught me. So I think to directly answering your questions, I think I had a sense of who I was, but that sense of who I was led me to return to the Catholic faith as a mature adult. And it feels very good. It's a good fit. I feel fulfilled. I feel I have a purpose in life. Does this make every day happy and I have no challenges? Absolutely not. But I feel, I must tell you, the book, Do You See What I See? Discovering the Obvious, it's about finding a better, more meaningful life. And I have done that basically by what I just said to you. For me, I look at this book and I say I said to my wife, I said, boy, you really, this is who I am. These stories in the book are all true. And, whether I'm talking about perseverance or change in one's life and the importance of making change, these are all things that I find universal, that are valuable. They have universal value. You just mentioned a while ago that whether you're an agnostic or, whatever faith or non-faith, whatever your guiding light is, there's something here for you. For me, I happen to believe in God. I happen to be Catholic, and while some of the stories deal with my faith, it's not banging anybody over the head. As you said, whether I'm pulling into a gas station or whether it's an antique store in Beverly Hills, or I'm hosting the Special Olympics, or for that matter, and you mentioned show business and what that's like, whether I'm doing, I was up for a role, as you know, reading the book with De Niro and Pacino, and it came to me with a lot of profanity in it, in the sides, which are excerpts from the screenplay. And I went, I was so disappointed to see the profanity because while there are a lot of good people in this world who it doesn't bother on camera, on the screen and off the screen, watching the films, it bothers me. So there was a challenge there of, as I said in the book, on the way to the audition, Lord, please guide me through this, because it was a tough call as an actor to do a film with these two guys, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. And I've done a lot of stuff as an actor, and so it was not like just any ordinary audition. But to deal with who am I? Am I a guy that doesn't believe in profanity, but I'll make the exception because it's De Niro and Pacino? Or do I not go in and have this audition and leave the profanity in? And, you would think on this phone call and Robert Hanley and, writing a book, and I talk about my faith occasionally in the book, it was a tough call. Because my life, I spent a lot of time acting, and some people think I know a little bit about the craft, and it was quite an experience. And in the end, I did 2 scenes on camera without they wanted to videotape me. So we did 2 scenes, and getting up from that interview, and I did it without the curse words, as I said. I got up, and by the time I left, it was very emotional for me, and I thought, gee, they never asked me about the curse words. And somehow, to me at the time, and ever since, the film wasn't as important to me as was finding out who I am. And for the purpose of this book, and as I say in the conclusion, people spend so much time on their career, they're so busy, they're doing this, they're doing that, but they don't ask themselves who they are and investigate. In our faith, we have the phrase, examine your conscience. Examine who you are. Look at who you are in these circumstances. Stop and smell the roses. Get off the rat race. Who are you? What type of a person are you? What are what are the good things you do? What are the things that aren't so good? And in my book, and by the way, the book can be picked up at En Route Books. That's ENROUTE books, with our friend Sebastian Mahfoud, who is a very good person, I might add. So the book was written with these stories to show people that in everyday events, whatever it is you do during the day, there you can find deeper meaning that seem to float past the observations of you or of most people. And that's what my book does. It gives you 24 real, true scenarios, events that happened to me in my life. And I think, as you said earlier, Al, I think these things, people can garner benefit out of all of these topics. Change, perseverance, having the courage of your convictions. Just it goes on and on and on and on. Trust, trusting that what you're doing is maybe there's another reason why things didn't work out for you, and trust, in this case, that there's a power greater than we are, and that sometimes when things don't happen to you, it's for your betterment, and not don't be so disappointed about it.
Yeah, I think, Robert, God's timing is perfect, and I'm going to ask you about that in your story. But, I think this book is so relevant today, and the timing is perfect. It's just such, people, they don't take the time. They put a lot of emphasis in their careers, and I talk to a lot of people, and it's almost everybody's 180 miles an hour. They don't have time to much or less catch their breath.
Al, I lost you. I'm not hear you.
I said what I liked about the book is I think it's very relevant for our time, because these lessons in here are very appropriate to the way, especially Americans are living their lives right now. One of the things that you would mention is we see in your part on trust, and there's all little lessons that affect us in the book that everybody goes through each and every day. One of the things I'd like to have you talk about, because I think it was so beautiful. So one of the stories I was there to observe, and I think in such an age where we get bad news and we think and such selfishness, we're told, and two stories in those your book, if you could touch on them, I really think bring home an important part for us. One was called The Leash, and the other one I was there to observe. If you could touch on those two stories, I think that'd be great.
Absolutely, I can, and I'm so pleased that you enjoyed the book as much as you are
absolutely.
saying. You're picking out things that make me feel again the words fulfilled.
This is an important book for our time, because I think this can touch and reach a lot of people. I absolutely believe that.
Well, thank you. The story on goodness is about my wife and I were driving home, and we saw this lady running in the street in front of us, a couple of cars in front of us, and we asked if we could help, and she said, no, there's a lost dog, and he's running, and we followed, and during the chase, I noticed that there were 4 or 5 other cars, and all of these people were, doing a good thing here, trying to help get this dog, and the dog would turn and run up another street, and we'd all turn with him, and then stop when the dog stopped, and got out of our cars and tried to catch the dog, and he'd run away, and we'd get back in our cars and chase him further. And at one point in the story, after quite a while, actually, I'd say this is at least a 10-minute journey that we did, the dog ran to a house which was near some bushes and trees, and if he ran in there, we'd never get him. And we made a semicircle around this house, the front yard of this house, and a man came out and he looked at all of us and he surmised the situation, saw the dog, and at one point the woman that we saw running in the street, and she was just, as they say in the book, her shoulders were going up and down, and she was so exhausted. And she said to everybody, she said, does anybody have a rope? And, there were different people there. There was an elderly couple, I guess, the two ladies, a man. There were about 9 of us. And the guy whose house we were standing on his lawn and watching with this cute little white dog, he nodded and he went inside the house and he got a rope and he handed it to the woman who's now on her knees, and the dog is huffing and puffing still, so is she. And she put a loop in one end of the rope and then put the other end of the rope through the loop, and she held it up. And the dog, as soon as he saw that, walked the 25 or 30 feet to her, put his head down, and she put the rope over his head. And I tell you, Al, I was stunned. And, wearing the leash, the dog was happy and, as if to say, what do we do now? And you know what, let me just read this from the book because I think it will, I have it in front of me here, this what I'm saying. Amidst all his nightmarish turmoil, something familiar to him appeared, instantly freeing him from the chase. He never questioned what he was supposed to do upon seeing the makeshift leash. Quite naturally, he trusted his feelings, walking directly to the blonde woman, bowing his head and allowing her to put on the leash, just as someone else had surely taught him long before this day. The woman locates a license around the dog's neck and says she and her husband, the middle-aged guy, who will bring the dog to a nearby shelter where she volunteers. Filled with gratitude for everything she did, we gathered around and warmly, sincerely thanked her. And as she leaves with the little white tail-wagging dog, the man whose property we were on goes back inside his house, and my wife and I join the others as we head to our respective cars. Having shared this experience with these people, I feel somewhat sad leaving them. Like the dog, they never questioned what they were supposed to do, but each in their own way trusted their feelings and did what some good people had surely taught them long before today. We drive off in different directions, likely sharing the same satisfying feeling that on this day we were a part of something good. And then there's a quote at the end of the story: the ordinary acts we practice every day at home are of more importance to the soul than their simplicity might suggest. And that's by Sir Thomas More. So the point being here, we do things like this and we don't realize, in this case, about ourselves and how good we are, that we do and we thank and we open doors for people and we do these different things, and all the people around us that we see who do good things every day, are you seeing them? Are you realizing this goodness? Are you bringing it into who you are and experiencing this? It's more than just a nice story. It hopefully changes somebody reading this to recognize that they themselves are a part of that many times during the day. So with that story, it was a beautiful moment, a beautiful feeling for my wife and me. And I'm glad you picked that out. It's I like that story. I like all of these stories to tell you.
So do I, and because they're very human. The story you just repeated for us. that's something human beings, they came together during a trial that this one individual was having. There possibly could have been a tragedy with that dog. We know how we love our pets, but there's something human that these strangers come together for a greater cause. And that's what I like about the book. There's so much of that, the basic humanity and the goodness that we don't hear and see, in my opinion, enough of. Speaking of your wife, there's a story in there called a section called Coincidence. As a Catholic, I really like to call them goddesses, but could you repeat that story? Because I thought that was very, very interesting.
I can, and that's a story that many people like hearing. When I met my wife the first time she saw me, when I met my wife, I didn't know I was going to marry her years later or anything like that. And then after she came to a meeting of that group I had talked about, the Entertainment Fellowship, and then she never came for quite a while to the meetings. And when we started dating and we're having a conversation where, usually couples, they start getting more serious with each other. And she said to me that just seeing me at the meeting, she didn't know who I was, or let alone that I started the group and was the facilitator and wrote the material. She just said, just seeing your physical being, it frightened me. And she said it was my first fellowship meeting, and she had driven to North Hollywood and was walking across the parking lot, and she saw me, and it wasn't like love at first sight or anything like that, but she had an overwhelming feeling seeing me. And we were at a pizza place when she was telling me this, and I said to her, it's interesting that you say that, because do you think God has something to do with this? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I've felt that I've been feeling for some time now that God put us together. And she said, I get this. This happens to me frequently, and I usually just smile when it happens, recognizing that God is guiding me or watching me or helping me or telling me to do this or do that. But it's palpable at times for me, and it's happened many times in my life. And she said to me, really? And I said, yeah, and I said, it's, I feel we were destined to be together, and she said, this is weird, and I said, do you believe in coincidences? And she said, she said, I understand your feelings about destiny, but I'm not sure I'd call this a coincidence. And I said, well, it's kind of interesting that, you had this overwhelming feeling, and I'm thinking God put us together. And as our relationship grew, there were other things that happened, so much so that I wrote a poem to her when, at one point when we were married, that said, like a story that was already written. And then one morning, Corrine and I had written this treatment for a television series, and I was telling her, let's read this and let me know what you think of it. And it was based on... the main character was based on my stand-up comedy act as Broadway Bob. Comedians know me as Broadway Bob and some other theater people. And Broadway Bob in the screenplay is totally wrapped up in show business. He's an actor and an entertainer and a comedian. He's very famous. Otherwise, we share the fact that we were both actors and comedians, but I wasn't, the superstar that he is. And at one point, I said to Corrine, when you write a treatment, you tell them a little bit about the story, and you tell them about characters, and maybe you give 3 or 6 examples of what an episode might be. And at one point, so I'm talking about Broadway Bob's love interest, Gina, who lives above her parents' Italian deli, and Corrine says, this is nice. She's talking about the story, and she says, and as she's talking, I'm realizing she's very much like the character Gina in the treatment I wrote. And then she says, we're reading about her mother, the character of her mother, who's very Italian, and Corinne gasps because the name of the mother is Carmela De Luca on the page that I wrote. And she gasped, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she says, "Carmela De Luca, that's my mother's name." And I said, "What do you mean? Your mother's name is Molly Ranieri." And she said, "No, Ranieri is her married name. You know, her grandmother was also named Molly, so instead of having two Mollys in the family, living in the same house, they called my mother Molly." And she said, and it's spelled the same way it's spelled here, the way you have it in your treatment, with two L's. And I immediately smiled, and amazed, as I say in the book here, Corinne stared down at the page trying to grasp the meaning of all this. A character I created based on my own life has a love interest whose mother has this exact same name as her own real-life mother. And oh yes, she was also dealing with the fact that I wrote this treatment and registered it with the Writers Guild of America 5 years before I ever met her. Dumbfounded, still staring at the page, Corinne said, "I can't believe this." Still smiling, "I can." Sometimes things occur that go beyond what most people would call coincidence. Sometimes things that happen are beyond chance, luck, accident, or mathematical calculation. Something occurs, and it's like a sign sent specifically for me, something so significant it fits perfectly into my life. I get a glimpse then of God's constant presence. It appears suddenly as if lost and now found, reminding me of something I wasn't expecting. There's something else, something more to life, something I am gracefully allowed to touch every once in a while. This is one of those times, and like an answered prayer, I am comforted, assured in a loving way that I am not alone. And that's the story. It's all of these stories are true, and that actually happened in several others over the years. Even in the process of having this book published and going through that, there were occurrences that happened to me that are people's jaw just dropped the same way they did with this story on coincidence. And people, when some people may say, when I say there are no coincidences, I mean, two people wear a red shirt to work one day, and you only have so many shirts in your closet. It's bound that, you could wear the same shirt as somebody else. But as far as life, I look at that as God's hand. Somebody else may say, well, there are a lot of Carmela De Lucas in this world. And, yeah, well, you wrote that, and, whatever. They'll come up with different reasons and just use the word coincidence. I don't believe it. I don't believe in many of the experiences that I have that it's coincidence. I do believe that God, the grace of God, the Holy Spirit, whatever you want to label that, is active in my life. And I'm, as I say here, it's every once in a while I'm given the gift of experiencing it, of realizing it. And, and that's a true story. So they all are.
And, speaking of that, you mentioned earlier that, even though you found God, you're walking your faith and doing this great ministry, you still have your trials like we all do in life. And one of the stories that you could share that I like, because I think it's so pertinent and available to people today, is the story about worry.
Sure. Worry is something that, and from a practical standpoint, that we all have. We're worried, and there's a quote in the book on worry that says, I've developed a new philosophy. I only dread one day at a time, and that's Charles Schultz, the character of Charlie Brown. I actually did that show, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. But yeah, it was during the earthquake in California in, I guess, 1994, And I had brought my mom out from California, from New York, from the Bronx, to live with me. And the earthquake hit, and it was just awful. The damage was extensive, and we were living there while construction guys were building, fixing the whole house up, and it took a year. And they came in one day and said, we're going to go down to the living room. My place had 3 levels, actually 4 with a 2-car garage underneath for those who were taking notes. But they said they had to drill the cement in our living room, meaning all the furniture had to be out of there, carpet had to be taken up, and they would drill down to the dirt in the house. And the issue for me was there was a grand piano in the living room, and I didn't know how I was going to get that grand piano moved. I wasn't working. Money was short. In show business, you work, you don't work, and I just went to bed every night worried about how I was going to move that piano. And I put it off and put it off and put it off, and at least a month went by. And finally, one morning, I think it was a Saturday, I got up, and these construction guys say it's got to be out of here next week, and then you don't see them for 2 months. But this time, they met the deadline. And I got up on a Saturday morning. They were due to come by that week for sure, the following week. And I got on the phone, made a phone call, and let me see if I can read this from the book. It might be clearer. I woke up the next morning. It was a Saturday. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the piano. After a moment, I picked up the phone, called 3 friends and a priest, and asked if they could help me move the piano. I'll get to the priest in a minute. I then called a place that rented trucks, drove over, got the truck, met the guys back at my house at noon, and we began to figure out how best to move the elephant, as I called it at this point in the story, because it just sat there like an elephant. We tied the piano shut with some yellow, super strong synthetic rope that one of the guys had in his car. Next, we tilted it on its side, unscrewed the legs, slid the body over the carpet, laid blanket-covered wooden planks over the stairs, and pushed it up and out and eventually onto the rented truck. We then drove to an empty room at St. Catherine of Siena's church. Thank you, Father Sean. He was a friend of mine and let me put the piano there. I then returned the truck to the rental place and drove my car back to my house. All told, it took 2.5 hours. Believe it or not, 4 guys who had never moved a piano before managed to move a baby grand in just 2.5 hours and without a scratch. Relieved, I went to bed alone that night. That is, with no piano in the room. I looked at the empty space where it had been, realizing I wasted 2 months of my life's energy on something I didn't have to worry about in the first place. The real problem was me and how I handle things, or in this case, don't handle things I don't want to handle. Anxiety ruled. Why? Habit, I guess, or maybe worrying is just a part of being human. I literally fell asleep thinking, give up worrying, pick up the phone, and do something. And in that story, the people who have read the book talking to me about that particular chapter, and other people, I have a fellowship now as well where we meet monthly, in talking about that, people can relate. We just put things off and put things off and put things off, and why? Just pick up the phone and do something. Just do something. And, as far as our faith is concerned, our Lord talks about, why are you worried about, look at what I do for the flowers, look at these other things. Stop worrying. Literally says, stop worrying. And if we just pay attention to that, and in everyday life, how many people come to the conclusion of stopping worrying and letting go of the worry? And people are good at it. Some of them are in such a mode where it's a part of their life. Worry is a part of their life. We meet these people. I mean, if you look at the house you live in, that you have food on the table, even if you're sick, that you have a doctor, all of these gifts that we have. But people who have everything, they just, I don't get it. They want to worry, and it takes away from the quality of your life. And people, like our faith, like our Lord says, stop worrying. Why worry? It's a waste of your time. Get out of the habit of worrying. So with that in mind, the worrying part is that's just another universal observation, so to speak.
Yeah, and you're so right, because Jesus in the Scripture, he even tells the apostle, in this world you have anxiety, but have confidence, overcome the world. And that your story brings that home so true, and it's important because many people are shook up today, and this is a valuable gem in that book. I have a favorite story, and I want you to, if you could, it's called "You Are So Beautiful," and it deals with perseverance. If you could tell our audience that particular story in the book.
I will. I was hosting the Special Olympics, which I did for 25 years at UCLA, the California State Games, and it was I guess it was in June, and I'm trying to find the story here as I speak. It was in June, and Special Olympics, usually, I was there as a host. There are many celebrities there, certainly Maria Shriver, Arnold Schwarzenegger, famous athletes from, Los Angeles Lakers, people of that, the Dodgers. They would come in, I'd introduce them, and we'd scream and yell at the athletes on as they swam or ran, and just cheered them on, go, 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 go. And at the end of that, usually starts on a Friday, and it goes all day Friday, all day Saturday, and most of the day Sunday, and then we have closing ceremonies on Sunday. We meet at, I think it was called Drake Stadium at UCLA. It's still obviously still there. And there was a portable stage set up on the grass near the track, and Rayford Johnson, who was a great Olympian, he was at the microphone, and he was about to introduce the Most Inspirational Athlete Award recipient. And he said for the first 8 of her 10 years, he said this young athlete had never walked. Through hard work and perseverance, she would now like to walk for us. The stadium hushed. Arduously, from the opposite side of the stage, a little girl got up from her wheelchair. She was off balance, swaying backward so far, I thought she was going to fall. As she teetered forward and then back again, it reminded me of someone who'd consumed too much alcohol. At one point, she swung her leg around and her foot touched the narrow black rubber mat down which she would walk. Wow, I thought. And then she fell. No one went to help her. We held our breath, waiting to see what anyone would do. On her own, she got up and took 1, then 2 more steps, and then fell again. She stood, got her balance, took another step, and fell again. Got up, took a step or 2, and fell again and again. Until finally, some 25 feet later, she stood before her coach, who was kneeling and smiling, and slammed her hands down into his waiting upturned palms. She had made it. The crowd roared. She joyously welcomed one great big hug after another from those gathered on the platform. The cheers and tears of 1,000 overcome people in the stadium celebrated the beauty that comes from embracing courage and challenging and overcoming fear, embarrassment, and failure. In some way, too, we appeared to be celebrating something deep within each one of us. We could relate. She prepared, she went for it, she fell down, and she got back up. Can anyone do more? Wasn't it the getting up we admired most about her? Didn't she remind us of the beauty we so often fail to recognize in ourselves, the beauty in who we are becoming as we walk down the respective narrow black mats of our own lives? Her coach faced the crowd and raised the young athlete's hand high above her head, as if she were the heavyweight champion of the world. The continuous roar of the crowd grew louder, and then he let go of her. She stood there for a moment, all by herself, and then she waved to us. It was the greatest applause I'd ever heard. Without words, she changed us. It was as if her true goal was to remind us of something she'd known for a long time and wanted to share. Human beings are beautiful, even, and perhaps especially, when we fall.
That's a beautiful story.
You know, there's something at the end, the quote, each true story is followed by a quote that pertains to what's in the title of the book, and that is Discovering the Obvious. Do you see what I see? Discovering the Obvious. And here's the quote. It's not what you look at that matters. It's what you see. And a lot of people went home and they probably said, gee, you wouldn't believe this is such a touching story that I saw. But bring that to yourself when you're going down your own black mat. You know, we are all faced with things. We are in college or studying somewhere, and we're sometimes we fail in our careers, in our marriages. You get a divorce, you get an annulment, whatever it is in your life that you fail. Recognize the beauty within yourself that you are persevering, and what a beautiful thing that is to recognize in yourself. Yeah.
You know that you just said that, and we talked about these God instances. I was just going to ask you, because you know there are people now listening to the show that are going to be struggling with some pretty major crosses in their lives. And I was going to ask you if you had any words of wisdom for them, but you just did that. And that really hit home, what you just said, because for those people that are struggling, take Robert's words to heart, because they are so true. And no matter what situation you're going through, you can overcome them. And that's why I think the need, Robert, for this book is so important today. It just seems that so many people are struggling with so many issues in their life, and you just named some of them: divorce, career struggles, family problems. And this book touches on each thing that is so human about us that we can learn from. And I would just, if we have time to, because believe it or not, we're coming to the end of the show. There's a beautiful story on friendship. If you could share that one last story, that'd be great.
I'm sorry, I didn't get what was the
story? With friendship, yes.
With
yes, you were
friendship.
There to observe. Yep.
Yeah, that's with Rosemary.
Yes.
Yeah, friendship, and I just turned to it, and it says the first quote that I put in the book was, lots of people want to ride with you in the limo, but what you want is someone who will take the bus with you when the limo breaks down. And that's a quote from Oprah Winfrey, and it's pertinent to the story. And the story is called I Was There to Observe, and basically that refers to when you want to direct a television show, a sitcom particularly, but just about any show, drama, you observe the director who's directing the show for a while. And for a while means sometimes you're there for weeks or months directing a show, depending on your own background. And although I directed in theater many times and had my own acting studio for many years, there was a period of time where I thought, let me look into directing a sitcom, because it appealed to me somewhat. And I had heard of a new situation comedy called Caroline in the City, and I found out that a friend of mine who had directed me in 4 or 5 theatrical productions in San Diego, which I mentioned earlier. Jimmy Burrows. And by the way, he directs Friends now. He did Taxi. Just a whole bunch of very, very Will and Grace, very successful shows. And as I say here, we hit it off on stage and off due to a lot of it had to do with our mutual love of comedy. And when I showed up, I walked onto the stage. It was a rehearsal, and he said, "Hanley?" And I said, "Yeah, how are you, Jimmy?" We hugged and talked a bit, and then I said, "Would it be all right if I observed for a while?" He said, "Yeah, sit there." And I did. And on the particular show where the soundstage, the particular show had Rosemary and what's his name? Maury Amsterdam.
Maury Amsterdam.
Yeah. And they were on the show, and I had done a show with Rosemary and Jimmy in San Diego many years before. And the idea, I was still in college down there in my 20s, and one of my favorite shows was the Dick Van Dyke Show, and I can't tell you how much comedy meant to me at the time, still does to a large extent, but comedy has just been part of my life, my whole life as a stand-up comedian as well. Rosemary and I hit it off, and this isn't in the book, but I'd go over to her hotel, and she'd be sunning by the pool, and we'd be talking about vaudeville and show business and all of those things, and I would just listen. The Dick Van Dyke Show, Maury Amsterdam, and then I got to meet Mr. Amsterdam, and it was just it was a great perk from being in show business, because not only are you acting and doing what you love, but you're a fan as well of these people. And as rehearsals went on, Rosemary did fine, but several times they had to stop because Mr. Amsterdam forgot his lines, and at 80 or so years of age, who could blame him? He seemed to be embarrassed by it all. I felt sorry for him. Hours later, everyone broke for dinner, which was being served on a nearby soundstage. I decided to stay for a minute to check out the set to investigate something pertaining to Jimmy's direction. Soon enough, I realized I was all by myself. The deserted stage had an overwhelming, eerie ghost town feeling. Empty stages in theaters usually have that effect on you when you're the only person in them. Silence ruled. There I stood amidst the motionless cameras, the lifeless set, and the abandoned, expressionless seats of the audience. The stillness of a shadeless light bulb pierced an artificial window from backstage. Then I heard something. Very quietly, I walked backstage, following the sound to the makeup room. I got a little closer. Through the open door, I could see Rosemary and Maury Amsterdam sitting face to face. They didn't notice me. I felt compelled to leave to give them their privacy, but equally compelled to stay, if only for a moment. I continued to observe from 35 feet away, soon realizing that I was witnessing something beautiful, something truly innocent and important. Like a teacher, Rose was helping Mr. Amsterdam with his dialogue. She was firm at times, but still completely there for him. She was, of all people, very aware of his situation. He was pressed, and so was she in wanting to help him. As often as I myself had run lines with other actors throughout my career, this struck me as something unique, something more. Two comedy legends, after years and years of working together, laughing together, crying, I'm sure, together, one needing help and the other providing it. I was, in that moment, watching two friends who loved each other. I was observing something I loved about this business that had nothing to do with performing. I was seeing something I admired, two pros, two people who had endured, who knew how to work and live and survive, who were overcoming a challenge together. Yes, indeed, I was observing the way it was and is supposed to be. Show business never looked better. And with that story, I have a quote by Mitch Albom: you can find something truly important in an ordinary minute. And the idea that, I'm sure I've done this in my own past, where I walk by something like that makeup room and I just go, well, she's helping him with his lines, and just go get a donut backstage. But to take the time to see the beauty in that, where you can learn something profound and bring it to yourself. When you go to somebody's house and you see how a mother takes care of her son or her mother and the patience that she endures, there's something to garner from that. And if we notice these things and bring them to ourselves, we will find out more about ourselves. And not only, I don't know where I heard this or who said it. I did not come up with this line, but the line was, I talk about in my whole life just about, but certainly in this book, know who you are. And this book is about finding a better, more meaningful life. And I feel that if you find who you are, and I added to that this, find who you are and you will find God. And I also say, find God and you will find who you are. And I do believe that those two roads come together. The more you look at some of the more meaningful things in your everyday life, the more you will be fulfilled and be at peace with this life we have on this plane called Earth.
As we book the show, and I want to thank you, Robert, for the book. Could you just tell the audience one more time where they could get that, please?
I'm sorry, you're going out. Say that again.
Where they could get the book?
The book can be gotten on enroutebooks.com, and that's E as in Edward, NROUTE books.com. That's a very good organization, a lot of very good people there. And if there's time, I'll just be very short here. I wrote this book to help people. Some people write a book to make money, and that's okay. But I just want to say I wrote this book to help people, and I hope people do get it. It will just please me very much, because I think it will help you, and that leaves me with a good thought. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Al.
Okay, thank you so much. Keep up the good work, and brothers and sisters, good night, and God bless.
Hi there, this is Christine Mooney Flynn, host of the Catholic Mama podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join me over on the Catholic Mama. To develop a Christian family and raise children who are, and who, God willing, will continue to be confident Catholics, requires us as parents to be confident in our faith as well. So each week, I dive into topics that help to make sense of the Catholic faith and how to live out that faith in our vocation as husbands and wives, moms and dads. So whether you need help in explaining aspects of Catholic doctrine like the real presence in the Eucharist, or if you're looking for practical ideas on how to live a more Catholic life, my goal is that you'll find the answers and guidance you're looking for over on my show, The Catholic Mama. I hope to see you there.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.